Live from Welwyn in Hertfordshire is the Secretary of State for Transport, Grant Shapps. Good morning, Mr Shapps.
Morning.
Let's just start on a fairly general note. There is a sense that this government is being overtaken by events this week. Clips have been shown of Priti Patel giving an interview 2 or 3 weeks ago where she refused to condemn fans who were booing players who were taking the knee against racism. She actually described that gesture as gesture politics. It all looks very out of date now when you see, and it's only a couple of weeks ago, and she hasn't said anything about it. She's kept stum. Just starting on that point, is there a sense that your government is being overtaken by events and is running to catch up?
No, I don't agree with that. I mean, first of all, I thought the football was remarkable, and it's so sad that people would ruin it with racist comments, abuse online, and we're acting on that. The Prime Minister called the social media companies in yesterday and pointed out that we're going to pass laws in something called the Online Harms Bill, which would fine them 10% of their global turnover if they don't sort this out. But, you know, as for everything else, we all abhor racism. No one wants to see it in society or in football or anywhere. And I think, you know, Priti Patel, of all people, who is herself from Ugandan Indian heritage and has spoken movingly about the racism that she experienced as, I think, a school child in the House of Commons. I've heard her speak about this. I think is the last person who we should be singling out here. I think we should all agree to fight racism.
We abhor the racism shown towards Priti Patel as well. But don't you think that by refusing to criticise those who boo the players who take a knee, that was, as Tyrone Ming says, part of the problem, stoking the fire? You know, to dismiss that as gesture politics, you might not agree with taking the knee, but not to criticise those who undermine it by booing those players who experience that racism at the very moment when they know they're on the national and international stage and they're going to receive abuse of the type you then criticise after the game. That was a mistake, wasn't it?
Well, as I say, I mean, I think we can support any way in which people want to express the desire to boot out racism, and I have no issue with that at all. I actually think, you know, the performance of the England players was superb. It brought the country together. It's a huge shame that we're having to debate racism yet again. It is a fact of life. It's a fact in football, and we must do everything possible to get rid of racism and discrimination.
Steve Baker, member of your own party, Steve Baker, and Johnny Mercer, actually, former Veterans Minister, have both said that it is time for the Conservatives' attitude towards racism, towards taking the knee, to change. So is it time to stop criticising footballers? I mean, I can't believe we're even saying it. To stop criticising the footballers who take the knee. Is it time to say to those fans who boo the taking the knee, don't do that? This is an important protest.
I think that, as I say, we should support our footballers. We should support anybody who wants to, whatever form their anti-racism takes. You know, I think we should support that. To answer your question, I didn't hear any booing at the stadium. Not that I heard on Sunday night. I think that we have, you know, shown as a country how we can unite and come together. And I think it's a shame to be, as you rightly say, it's a shame to be having these sort of quite arcane debates about it when we all want the same thing, to boot the racism out. And that's why the Prime Minister hauled in those social media companies, which is where we're seeing, you know, it's online that we're seeing a lot of that abuse as well, making it clear that that cannot continue. And we will take measures, including very, very strong fining of those companies, 10% of their global turnover, if they don't find ways to prevent that from continuing.
Well, you mentioned the Prime Minister, and the thing is, when we get into a big national debate that's going on at the moment, in this case about racism, past words can come back to haunt politicians. And earlier on the programme today, we were discussing some of the articles that Mr Johnson wrote when he was a freelance journalist, largely for The Telegraph, for which he was roundly attacked at the time for displaying what was seen as racist elements in his commentary. We're thinking about the comments he made about the burqas and the letterbox and all of that stuff. And there were other articles as well, things which maybe he meant as a joke, but which were taken very much as offensive remarks, particularly by people of colour. That's on the record. That's been written. Is that an embarrassment for the government to have a Prime Minister who's written those things?
Well, first of all, I mean, again, I often hear people talk about his article about the burqa. If you actually take the time to read the article, it was a passionate defence of the right of women to wear the burqa. It was a liberal argument, if you like. But, you know, we can go back over territory many times before, that have been covered many times before. Look at what's actually happening. Look at this cabinet, which is the most diverse. I think Boris Johnson's had the most diverse cabinets that we've ever had in this country. The Home Secretary, the Chancellor, the Business Secretary, and the President of the big climate change conference, COP26, who's a cabinet minister, and many more. I think in society you break those ceilings by ensuring that people understand that there are no limits to how far they can go, and race, religion, sexual orientation, all the rest of it should have nothing to do with it at all. And in a way, we're demonstrating that through action rather than just words.
When you say, Grant Shapps, when you say that the Prime Minister hauled the social media companies in yesterday, that was a pre-organised event. What we want to know is, what has he told the social media companies to do? No, you have an online harms bill. It's not going to come into law until next year at the earliest. For all of the diversity in the cabinet, we've all seen the disgusting abuse online, and nobody understands why it isn't immediately taken down. Those social media companies earn money every time someone looks at a piece of online abuse. So what has the Prime Minister done to tell the social media companies yesterday, to get rid of that abuse immediately?
Yeah, look, I think you're absolutely right about the online world, how it can be, the Wild West, and just, abuse of all kinds. I mean, we've seen this, any public figure will know from their own social media timeline. And it's not just racism, it goes beyond that as well. And he had them in yesterday and said, look, you must take this stuff down.
Or what?
And
what?
Or we will have legislation. And you're quite right. I'm afraid the legislative process, passing laws, does take time. Or this online harms bill will tax you 10% of your global turnover. That is not trivial for these companies. So we do expect them to act. Now, they say, well, it's difficult for us to monitor everything that's being said. We don't own what's written online. And we're saying to them, look, you're clever enough and smart enough to be able to, for example, weed out disinformation about COVID online, which is one of the things they've been doing. You should be able to pinpoint racism and set up algorithms to handle much of that. And if you don't, we're going to legislate. As I say, we're doing that anyway, and it's going to cost you dear, so get on with it. That's what he said to them.
There's lots to ask you about this morning. Let's move on to face masks. That does seem to be kind of blowing back in the government's face a bit. I mean, it won't be a legal requirement for anyone in England to wear them in a few days' time. Already you're seeing big challenges. We interviewed the Mayor of London this morning. He is going to make it a prerequisite that you have to wear a mask on any form of London transport, and he's going to enforce that with his transport officers. I mean, that is a direct challenge to what Boris Johnson has said. I know Mr Johnson has said, we'd like you to keep wearing the masks where you think it's appropriate, but you don't have to. It's another piece of ambivalence, isn't it, from the government?
No, I don't agree at all. I was doing the round last week. I think he possibly even on your programme, although you went on, saying we are, although we're removing it from law, fully expecting and indeed invite individual transport operators to do what is right in their circumstances. So, for example, we saw the airlines come forward and say you will need to wear a face covering if you're travelling by air. And I think I even mentioned London Underground may well decide that as a condition of travel, they may require it. Why? Well, they have very crowded services a lot of the time, so it makes sense. On the other hand, if you're on a long-distance train, middle of the night, or later in the evening or something, you're the only person in the carriage. The law would clearly be a bit of nonsense if we carried on requiring people to wear face coverings for no reason. So this is not only what we thought would happen; it's what I said would and should happen.
It was about personal responsibility. You've now changed. This is now about the transport company's responsibility, or the local transport authority.
I say both, and use the term a condition of carriage, and we see that in other ways as well, and it doesn't cause confusion. For example, actually, when Boris Johnson was mayor, he brought in a condition of carriage that said if you went on the London Underground, you must not be drinking alcohol on the Underground. It's a condition of carriage. On a long distance journey, if you're having a snack or a meal, you could still have alcohol.
So you would expect the travel companies or the travel authorities to introduce those conditions of carriage?
And indeed invited them to do that. Okay. So when the mayor says that's required for London Underground, that's exactly what we invited the mayor to do if he felt that was appropriate for TfL and London.
Can I ask you one last question about the AstraZeneca vaccine? Because there is a story on the front of the Daily Telegraph this morning that British holidaymakers are being barred from even getting on flights to certain countries because they have received the Indian-made version of the AstraZeneca vaccine, and that is not licensed in the EU. Now, are you going to suggest to holidaymakers that they check which version of the AstraZeneca vaccine they have, or are you immediately going to the EU and saying, this is outrageous?
Yeah, the specific issue on the front of the Telegraph is with reference to Malta. And there is a sort of error in interpretation here, because there's the Serum Institute in India that makes a couple of different versions of vaccines. The version of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is 100% compliant. Our medicines agency, the MHRA, have said as much, and of course we'll be contacting the Maltese to point out there is no difference. They do make a different version, which isn't recognised by our medicines agency, and I think there may be some confusion there that the Maltese authorities think that we may have provided that version. We haven't, and so of course we'll be in contact with them to try and straighten this out. Ultimately, it's their decision. We can't tell them what to do, but we'll certainly set out the facts for them.
Right. Well, that's clear. Listen, we'd like to finish with a little boy, Dexter, who's 9, who we interviewed about an hour ago on the programme. He's the little boy who wrote the letter to Marcus Rashford. You'll be very well aware of it, giving him comfort for missing the penalty. And he's gone on to write a lot more letters since, and he's been following the debate on these awful racist tweets and posts and racism generally in the country. And this is the letter that he's sent to the Prime Minister.
Dear Boris Johnson, I, Dexter Letter, do not think you are doing enough about racial abuse. Personally, I think racial abuse online should lead to many people being banned from social media. If it's happening face-to-face, it should lead to warning of prison or other consequences. From Dexter Letter, age 9. He's
saying basically that he's not doing enough. The Prime Minister's not doing enough.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, what a fantastic letter. The Prime Minister absolutely is working flat out to defeat racism in this country. I mentioned before, I think we've got the most diverse cabinet in the country. One of the things you can do to stop racism is make clear that there is no place in society, even at the highest echelons of running the country. I think that's really important. And yesterday he hauled in those social media companies. You're right that unfortunately changing laws in this country takes quite a while to do. We have to go all the way through the democratic processes of votes in Parliament and the rest of it. But we're on the case. And in the meantime, there is something these social media companies can do about it, and we want them to do it. I should point out that one other aspect of this is that some of this abuse is coming internationally in, and clearly people, bots, maybe even automated, stirring up some of this as well. Where we can identify, where the social media companies can identify people in the United Kingdom, they should have no hesitation to boot them off and sue them with the full force of the law.
Well, we're finishing now, but we know that Boris Johnson is a very busy man. Obviously, he's the Prime Minister, but will you make sure that he answers Dexter's letter?
Yes, absolutely. We'll make sure that happens.
Excellent. OK, thank you very much indeed for your time.